Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easy for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a fantastic guest. This is truly one of my favorite people in the world. I've known him my whole life. He's a dear friend of my parents, and he is probably the biggest giver I know in the community. And what I mean by that is he has served as a volunteer on more boards and put more hours into our community in so many ways than anybody I know. So he's also just a whole lot of fun. So with no further ado, I bring my dear friend Guy Recotta, the Hammond City Court Clerk of Court. Guy, how are you?
Parker, I'm fantastic, and thank you for that wonderful introduction and all those very kind words.
Well, if I got into your resume, we'd be here all day. So I had to cut it short, but I meant every word of it. And I'm just so grateful for you as a friend, as are my parents and brother and everybody in our family. But why don't we go? I know that most people probably know you, but not everybody will. People are moving in our community every day. So
That's
why
right.
don't we kick things off with you just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I grew up in Hammond. I am the son of a butcher, and my grandfather was a butcher, and my dad was a butcher, and we owned grocery business in the city of Hammond. First, it started in 1925.
Wow.
So, in
so it takes a multi-generation to come up with the greatest Italian sausage in the history of mankind.
And that's where we're going to end up with some good Italian sausage.
Oh yeah.
So in 1925, Mary and Joe Ciccone got married and opened Ciccone's Grocery on Kate Street in Hammond. And that's where they stayed until about 1966 when my grandfather retired. And my mother and father took it and it became Guy's Grocery. We stayed on that block until my brother had to eventually close the store for a few years back. But we were in business on the same block in the city of Hammond for 90 years. So that grocery store lasted 90 years. And the Italian sausage recipe still lives today.
Any place I see it, I'm like, I got to get some of that because it's nothing that can rival it.
So I grew up in town. I went to Catholic school, attended Hammond High School, went off to LSU. Got a couple of degrees from LSU, continued my education at Southeastern, got a couple of degrees from Southeastern, and went to work for Tangipahoa Parish School System. And I have to be honest, I was a terrible second grade teacher. I was just terrible.
I don't believe that at all.
No, it was terrible. I wasn't made for that. I wasn't geared up for that. I was a speech pathologist, and I couldn't find a job, so I had to take a job as teaching, taking the slot for Nancy Hood when she went out for her first job. So I took the second grade class, ended up bouncing around a little bit, but spent almost 19 years at Hammond State School, and I loved my career at Hammond State School. Stayed there until I retired from teaching in 1997 and went to work for my dear friend Grace Gassaway at City Court. And today I still work at City Court. So that's
the word on the street amongst us lawyers is that Judge Sledge will not let you retire. I know there were always rumors that you may retire, but I'm very glad you have not. And I know the judge is very glad also. Well, I don't know whether it's a secret court order mandating you into indentured servitude or not. But the word is Judge Britton Sledge is going to be a sad man if you ever make that decision.
Well, one day, of course, we know that day may come. But right now, I enjoy working for Judge Sledge. Look, Britton is a wonderful guy. He's doing a great job, and he's held us together. He's came along at a time when we needed someone who we could adhere to and follow, and he's gave us the leaderships that we need, and he's doing it super. And I love working for him. So right now, I'm working.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep working until I'm not.
We need you. Keep it up.
Well, thank you. I look forward to work. And then look, it's the court system. Even though we're just a city court system, I shouldn't use the term just a city court system. We handle some very serious issues. Judge Sledge handles some very serious juvenile issues. So it's not simply traffic tickets and some, but we also have lawsuits, and you know that. I mean, I'm sure all of the attorneys.
I've been there, yeah.
You've been there, so
we have one of my favorite cases I tried was in Judge Gassaway's court. It was a clash of the Titans, and maybe the last There was a very, very good defense attorney for State Farm, and she passed away recently, and it might have been the last trial she had, but I just had a great time with her, Judge Gassaway, my co-counsel. It was a fun court to practice in under Judge Gassaway. I haven't been there for Judge Sledge yet. I'm glad you mentioned the juvenile angle.
Yes.
While the civil stuff, like what I handle, is limited. You can't take $1 million case to Hammond City Court.
No, it's a $30,000.
And in other civil courts. But with regards to the criminal jurisdiction at the juvenile level, it's as serious as it gets. And these are these decisions that are going to change lives forever and the trajectory of these children. And, so y'all have the heavy stuff going on there.
It's very true. It's very true. Most citizens may not know this, but Judge Sledge will handle everything in the 7th Ward with juveniles, from a traffic ticket to murder. And I know that sounds sort of drastic, but those are the kinds of charges: attempted murder, attempted second degree. Those are the kinds of charges that come through the court from time to time. So it's not just a small town court. It's very important to the quality of life. What happens in that court has a lot to do with how our community grows and develops and how we respond to everything.
Absolutely. We're going to circle back and take a deeper dive into the court, and we're going to talk about the Gassaway years, because talk about a local legend. And spoiler alert, we'll give you a link to hopefully to Judge Gassaway's interview. She did one of the very first interviews on this show ever, and it was spectacular.
I remember that.
But before we get into all that, I want to share a few quotes here. So Andrew Kirsch, who like me is a St. Joseph dad, he says, "Hey, Guy."
Hey,
he also says he hopes all is well with you. Andrew, thanks for watching. I hope you're doing well. And tell Mason, my former basketball player who beat my team this year, as you know, that his old former coach says, hey. Daryl Ferreira, our mutual friend Guy, says, "Guy, I appreciate all you do for our community. We are extremely fortunate to have you and Parker leading and paving the way. It's an honor to call you both a friend."
Oh, that's very
Daryl, that means a ton. And
thank you, Daryl.
What do they say? It takes one to know one. Daryl's a community leader like you.
Yes,
he served on countless boards and led them. Guy, you've been president of just about everything, and Daryl seems to be following in your footsteps in many ways. And my dear friend James Gibbs Jr., one of the most talented musicians and just all around great guys around here, comments on Hammond State School. He says that was a great job for many. And James, as usual, you're absolutely right.
It was.
So thank you to all of our friends who have commented. And I want to take the opportunity now, if you're watching live, like Andrew and Daryl and Guy, and how about this next one, Guy? Both of our favorite, Miss Faye Ivaniski says, "My friend Guy, love him. No one like him. The best, Lord Guy Recotta."
Oh, Lord.
Lord Guy Recotta, what's the story there? Have you been knighted? I didn't know about that.
Well, there is a story. I was given the title of Lord by some of your friends and mine. But to have the title of Lord, as I understand it, you have to be a property owner in the country, in Scotland, and to be a Lord in Scotland. So I was bequeathed, I don't know what the term is, I was given a piece, I own a square foot of property.
I love it.
I have a certificate, and I've been declared a Lord.
That makes you a real Lord. I did something for my staff last year where there's this, I think it's like Turn Me Royal, might be the website, but I took a photo of each of my staff member, and I went to this website and I hired them to paint royal portraits. So, for example, Megan Notriano Liddell would look like Queen Elizabeth, and Leon Christ would look like everybody was a different baron or duke or whatnot.
Well,
but you are actual royalty.
I'm a real, and I want to thank our friend Dr. Tony Licciardi for making that happen. I came to work one day.
Yeah.
And my sign with my parking sign said Lord.
That sounds like Dr. Licciardi.
Oh, he's a piece of work.
That rascal. But I can only say nice things about him. He drove me to the Pelicans game last night.
What you gonna say?
He picked up all three guys at our individual homes, and that makes for a long night when you're dropping us off. So
he's a gentleman and a scholar.
Yeah, you're right about that for sure. A few more comments here. Your wonderful son Brandon, who I chatted with earlier online, says he loves you, Dad. Brandon, thank you so much for
I love that boy.
I knew you'd be there.
I
Speaking
love
of
my
boards,
son.
Brandon serves with me on the Tark board.
Yes.
We had the Tark radiothon today. So as they say, the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. He's continuing your legacy.
He's a hard worker.
Absolutely. A hard worker and a smart guy and a great guy. So
A
folks,
good
we're here
son.
with Hammond City Court, Guy Recotta. I'm sorry.
As I said, and he's a good son, and he's married to a wonderful daughter-in-law.
Amen to that, for sure. So we're here with Clerk of Court Guy Recotta of Hammond City Court, and we're going to dig into what the city court does and Guy's role in it. But first, I want to circle back to your younger days. You mentioned go starting in Catholic school, and you got to be one of the most educated people to come on my show. And I'll say speech pathologists have a warm place in my heart. I have two little boys, as you know, both receive speech services at Southeastern, and we're very grateful for that. But what was life like growing up in Hammond, in your day, and you having a downtown business? What was your day like? I mean, people have come on the show and talking about being out until the sun went down, or the streetlights came on. What was your childhood like?
So you wake up early on a Saturday when school days were all the same. School days we'd walk I lived downtown. In fact, growing up, we lived with my grandparents, Mary and Joe Giacone, and we all lived in the same house, and it's the same property where I currently reside. That's where my grandparents live. So I'm where I grew up. I'm on the same property.
Oh, wow.
So you get up on a Saturday morning. First thing I would call my pawpaw, because he had a grocery store and I wanted to go to the grocery store. So you picked up the phone and you wait for the operator to come on. Right. And this happened. I promise this happened on more than one occasion. People may not believe this, but it's the truth. So I'd wait, and Miss Miller, the operator, would say, she said, operator. I said, Miss Miller, I said, I need to talk to my pawpaw. And she said, now, Guy Jr., he's busy. It's Saturday morning and everybody's calling in their grocery orders, because we delivered in those days. She wouldn't let me talk to my grandpa unless it was an emergency, and I had no emergency. So on many occasions, I'd be put on hold, and then at some point, she let me talk to my grandfather. So you go to downtown, and look, living downtown was great. We always lived downtown. So it was 1 block to Main Street. I mean, I'm a block from Main Street. So
you're on Charles Street, is that right?
I'm on Charles, right.
Okay.
So the exciting thing about Saturday mornings is we could go to the kiddie shows at the Columbia Theater for free. Oh, wow. Mr. Paul Genoble had the cleaners down the street on East Charles, and he gave away free tickets for you to go to so at 9 o'clock, we'd all pile up into the theater for about 3 hours of kiddie show, which were cartoons. And then after that, take your bike and head across the street to Woolsworth, check out the goldfish and all the tropical fish, and get you some candy, because the candy was like 1 cent. You got 10 pieces of candy for a penny. I don't know. It was crazy. And then after that, back to the house for a game of baseball or football. And we played in the street. I mean, there weren't too many cars, Parker. There just weren't too many cars. And so we ate outside during the summertime. Nobody was allowed in the house. The kids were not allowed in the house. The lemonade was on the back step. Grandma would put the lemonade on the back step, and that's as close to the house as you could get. And so it was fun. We didn't lock doors. We had hobos that came through town on the train. The train was always a big issue. And
can I tell you a story? My dad told me a hobo story this week.
Okay.
So, and I had to explain to my little boys what a hobo was when I retold the story. But as you mentioned, in that era, hobos are a big deal. And so my dad's used to seeing these hobos with a stick over their shoulder and maybe a big red handkerchief or some kind of cloth with all their stuff balled up on it on the end, right?
Right. So
Dad decides he's mad at his parents. He wants to run away, and he's going to be a hobo. They didn't live as close to the train as you did, but they were within 3 or 4 blocks. So he announces this plan. He's got his stick and his gear. And he said his father was reading the newspaper, if you will, and he didn't even look up from the paper, but he talked to my dad's mother. He said, Inez, isn't this something? The zoo just came through on the train, and a lion escaped right here in Ponchatoula. And so Dad said he only had the courage to make it to the front porch. He couldn't go out. He was too scared there was a lion on the loose. And so that cut his hobo career short. But it's something that 2 hobo stories in 1 week
Isn't that
is a
amazing?
rarity in 2024, but it was a big
Look,
part of the iconic
hobos,
downtown area.
what I remember about these gentlemen who come to the house, they came to our house and came to the front porch and would knock on the door. And I remember my grandmother and grandfather explaining to us that these were just people, these were men who lost their jobs and were trying to find another place to live. And they would stop in Hammond because the train always stopped in Hammond. All the trains stopped in Hammond. And it was sort of a fraternity. I'm going to use the term fraternity for not lack of a better term. But they let each other know when as they traveled through the state or the different areas where there were friendly people, where they could go and get.
Yeah, I heard they would somehow, mark the house in a subtle way.
I heard about that. I never found that, but my grandmother would make a bag full of sandwiches and load them up. Yeah. She'd let them sit on the front porch and give them something to drink and feed them on the front porch, and then after that they'd leave.
Yeah,
that was probably in the early '60s.
That's a different era. I mean, we've got certainly a growing homeless situation here in Hammond, but that kind of charity and that kind of safety, and people would just come get a sandwich and leave and not steal anything.
Yeah, you can't do that. That doesn't happen anymore.
Yes, sadly, not so much. So you're growing up with this kind of, and one thing I want to mention out of your story, to give credit to Guy, it sounds to me like Guy's Grocery was Amazon Prime before Amazon Prime, or before Walmart delivered groceries to your house. Guy's Grocery would bring it to you.
Jaconi's Grocery, Jaconi's and Guy's delivered. Yes, we did. That was one of the things.
That's great.
I remember. I used to go with the gentleman who delivered the groceries to assist. I was an assistant grocery delivering person, and I would be tipped. I won't call her name, but I had a cousin who tipped us. And this is a terrible story, but I've got to tell it because I've told it to my family. So we'd carry the boxes of groceries in, and she'd give the gentleman and me, she'd give us each a nickel. Well, that was good. A nickel was cool.
It was 1 cent, right?
Yeah, you could get two of the big moon cookies for a penny, or you could get a Coca-Cola for a nickel. I mean, that was cool. So that was all good. Shortly thereafter, Cokes went to 6 cents. And so we were delivering one Saturday, and the nice lady gave each of us another nickel. And I was being abrasive. I'm not sure what you could call it, but I called her name and said, Cokes are 6 cents now. She didn't bite it. She just, I think she called my parents and told them that I was being sarcastic.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Anyway, so there's a lot of good that happened in those days, though.
Yeah, sounds like fun times. Let me share. We were talking about Tony Licciardi. Dr. Licciardi, you must be like Beetlejuice. So we say your name 3 times, you appear. So Tony has come on to say that both Hammond and Tangipahoa Parish, Guy, are the beneficiaries of a lifetime of selfless public service by you. He can't think of anyone who epitomizes selfless public service like you do. Well said, Dr. Licciardi. You are,
thank you, Doc.
As Guy said, a gentleman and a scholar, and you write like one too.
Yes.
So thank you for that. Another dear friend of ours, Wesley Daniels, J. Wesley Daniels II, says, great to see you, Mr. Guy. Hopes all is well. Wesley, thank you for tuning into the show. I hope you're doing well. Please give Brandy my best. So many great people watching here. So we're learning about Guy Recotta in the early years, growing up downtown. You go to Hammond High School, you go to LSU first, and then Southeastern.
Yes.
The 2 wonderful universities we have access to here in less than an hour away.
Absolutely.
I know they both played big roles in your life. What were they like back then? Because now, LSU is one of the largest universities in the country, and Southeastern is a much bigger than people know. Well over 10,000 students. What was it like when you were there in each of those universities?
Well, as an undergraduate at LSU, it was just amazing. It was fun. I was never afraid of getting lost or I never thought of it as being big, but it was a huge, even back in the 71 to 75, it was a very large university. but I made friends. Dormitory life was great. Fraternity life was great. There wasn't a lot of, there wasn't much hazing, and that wasn't an issue back when I was at LSU. Great professors, just a wonderful time. If I could have stayed longer, I would have. In fact, I stayed one extra semester so I could catch an extra, I did my student teaching one fall so I could stay another football season.
That's a common plan. I've seen brothers do that.
Yeah, it worked. My parents were very generous and very kind. Then I went to graduate school. I got my first graduate degree from LSU while I was working. I went to the scholarship program, as my father called it. Mr. Guy said, son, he said, the scholarship program ends on the day you get that diploma. So we finished. I went to work right away, started teaching, working the school systems around. And then my last couple of degrees, I was teaching and working, but I was going to Southeastern at night. And it was a different time. It was graduate school. So, we just went to class. I didn't participate I wasn't able to participate in the collegiate lifestyle there, except for going to class and making my grades. And in those days, the more degrees you had, the higher your rate of pay would be in the school system. So every degree that you received, you got a little bit of a kick in your salary. So
it sounds like you maxed out. You seem like the Michael Jordan of education, where you need a ring for each finger for all your degrees.
Now the other thing about it is this too. I was working in school systems. So after my parents paid for my college degree and I didn't have any debts after my first degree, from there, then I started working in school systems. And at that time, we had the PIPS program, and it was a professional improvement plans. And all of my tuition and books were paid for, Parker, for my last 3 degrees. I didn't pay anything to go to school. Great. It was a blessing. And so, I mean, how could I not take it up? The price was right. I mean, they had the right zero.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I had no idea there were programs like that before.
Yeah, it was very popular at that time.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about. So you mentioned you get these degrees, you can make more money, and of course, we all know you would go from being a teacher into administration. How did that transition come to be, and how did you end up at the state school?
Well, good story. I'm sitting in a master's plus 30 or a specialist student, one of the probably master's plus 30. I'm sitting in that class at Southeastern, and I think it was one of Dr. Tedder's classes. And this lady comes to the door, Miss Helen Addison, Britton's aunt, who at that time had just come back from being a nun. She gave up being a nun.
Wow.
And she had gone to work with Mr. Glass with the Special School District number 1 at Hammond State School. So she was brought in by Austin Glass and the Department of Education to establish a public school system inside the institution at Hammond State School. And in those days, there were over 800 residents at the Hammond State School. So Helen just had heard that I was working on one of my degrees, and she decided she thought I would be good for the job. And now at this point, I'm still thinking I might be a speech therapist. Maybe I really didn't like speech therapy. It just wasn't my thing. So Miss Helen walks in this class and tells the professor, she tells Dr. Tedder, I need to talk to this young man right here. And I knew her, so she came up and said, I need you to come to work tomorrow. I said, what do you mean? She said, I need you to come to work. I got a job for you. You can come work with me at Hammond State School. I said, Helen, I don't know how to, that's not me. I don't have a degree in that.
Well, but what's that say for your reputation? You're getting recruited out of your classroom. That's unheard of.
Yanked me out of school, man. Yanked me out. So I went the next day because I didn't have a job that summer. So during the summer, teachers didn't work, but this was a 12-month job. We worked year round at Hammond State School. I loved it, loved working for Helen, and worked with her as a teacher first for a couple of years, about a year, then became her assistant principal. And then when she retired in 1988, I took over as the principalship. And I stayed there as principal until I retired.
So clearly she's got a big influence on your career. I mean, not only did she
Oh,
recruit you to this big job, but she mentored you, brought you
totally.
along. What can you say about her and the example she set while you were working under her?
She is a remarkable, still is a remarkable human being. Compassionate, intelligent, energetic, had so much compassion and love for the special needs children, taught me everything I know about special education. I had all the degrees, but none of it mattered because Helen taught me everything that I really needed to know to be a good teacher and administrator. Still my best friend in the whole wide world. We still work together with Hammond Strawberry Fields. We formed in 1988 when she left. We formed a nonprofit corporation to provide community homes and day programming for special needs, special ed children. And we still own some of those homes and do that kind of work together. She's sort of, I say semi-retired because she still stays pretty active.
Yeah.
What a blessing, man. I mean, it's like, she's like my big sister.
Well, you make a good point. You can have all the degrees in the world and it not matter. I think of my legal career, it has not helped me a ton in my career to have been #1 ranked student at LSU Law School. Much more important to me are the mentors that I had along the way, the judges and attorney general and lawyers that I work for, folks like our dear friend Tom Waterman. Those are the people that turn you into a great professional, the guys that come along, set an example, but also stop and take the time to invest their own time and energy and attention in you. So to get that from Miss Helen was a godsend, not just for you, but for our community, because it allowed us to get those decades of your leadership and have the benefit of the best version of you. But while we're on the topic of incredible, professional women, let's talk about Judge Grace Gassaway, who, speaking of getting recruited, I know she went and marked her man in recruiting you to bring you to help her run Hammond City Court. How did that all come about?
Well, it's a simple story. So I had just retired before she decided to run. She was actually in her campaign, and I had just taken my 20-year retirement from teacher retirement, and I was going to work with Helen in the community homes, and that was going to be my future, and I was going to spend that time. But Grace and I, through her sister Patricia Westmoreland, we became good friends, and we would exercise together. We would jog and walk. Mostly, she did a lot of jogging, I did a lot of walking, or whatever you want to, trotting, whatever we called it. So Grace and I got to be very good friends, and I was able, since I was retired, I was able to help her with her campaign, with no intention of ever going back to work again. I mean, I thought I was finished and was going to just work at Hammond Strawberry Fields. So as we continued, as the election went on, of course, she was elected, and it was exciting, and we were still exercising, and she went to, I remember the first day, her swearing in ceremony on New Year's Eve night. Justice Kitty Kimball was there to do the swearing in. It was at her house, at Grace's house. And she asked me that night, she said, "When are you gonna come work for me?" I said, "What are you talking about? Come work for me? I have a job." And she said, we'll talk later in the next week. So she started on a campaign of telling me why I should come to work with her, for her, and how good I would be. And I said, "You don't understand, Grace. I've worked with special ed kids." She said, "You'll be perfect with this job." She said, you'll be perfect with your background." She was
right. As usual, that's why it was right.
It worked out. And again, I learned everything I know from her about the judicial system. And she was a dear friend, and I just miss her every day.
Yeah, she was a great judge, a great friend, a great person. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in the notes here, we have a link to her interview. So I would encourage anybody that has the time to go check that out, because this was a dynamic woman.
Totally amazing.
Many passions and loyalties, and just there are not enough accolades. There are not enough good things to say about Judge Gassaway. She was just the best. And if you didn't know her, go watch her. You'll learn something. And if you did, take a trip down memory lane, because boy, she was a tour de force and a great judge. And I say that having ruled against my client many times. I hated to admit it in the moment, but as usual, she was right. But thank you for sharing that about her.
Thank you for letting me to have that.
How do you compare? Because you mentioned, you kind of alluded to the fact that, you're working with special education children, running a court. Clearly, there are a lot of administrative skills that overlap. You're managing people in both situations. You
Yes.
had great big staffs to manage. But what were the differences? What were the similarities? What did you learn from the first job that you took to the second?
Well, one of the biggest changes that for me was the fact that I left a job, left the job with 110 employees and moved into a job with 25 employees. So it was really it was far less stressful than it was in the beginning. In my first job at Hammond State School, it was just much less, just fewer people. But
yeah, and did you mention earlier you had 800 residents at the state school?
We had 800 residents, and we had there were over 1,000 employees, and then on top of that was the special school district #1 employees, who we ran the school. In our school, we had 353. I think 353 of the residents were school age, but Helen, bless Miss Helen Addison's heart, it didn't matter if they were school age or not. If there was an activity going on and there was a classroom or a makeshift classroom activity, and somebody was in a wheelchair or in a bed, we rolled them all together and they participated. Helen, we didn't pay much, in the early days, we didn't pay much attention to the age limits.
Yeah.
But I think that was the biggest thing. But of course, I was used to working with the Department of Education and the civil servants at Hammond State School, and that just slid right on over to working with attorneys and law enforcement agents. So I guess I was pretty well prepared. Grace must have figured it out, because I was fairly well prepared to handle some of the difficult situations that you have in the court system.
Well, the clerk of court of Hammond City Court, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you're not just the clerk of court, you're the administrator for the courts. You're handling HR, personnel, employee oversight. So when you think about that, it's the biggest hire of Judge Gassaway's career. She's got to get that right. If she messes up hiring you, while she's a brilliant legal scholar and a great judge on the bench, the rest of her life's in chaos, because even 20 people, and that's double what I have on my team, and that sounds like a lot to manage.
I took it very seriously, because it was a very serious position. Whenever you have you have to swear on your oath, take an oath of office. It's pretty important and pretty serious. Yeah, at least I think so.
Well, Miss Fay has circled back to make a great point. She says that Judge Gassaway and Guy were the perfect fit, and she was blessed to work with both of you. And y'all made quite a trio. And then, along with other critical pieces of that team, Hammond City Court's just been for a long time a really well-run court. I've had cases from Shreveport and Lake Charles to Slidell, and so I've seen a lot of different courtrooms. I've worked in several courtrooms and federal court and so on. And y'all, you do it as well as anyone, and so that's a testament. James Gibbs says, great interview. He loves you as a guest, Guy. Thank you for that, James.
Thank you very much.
Another friendly face here, Kyle Johnson, my buddy, and of course your nephew of sorts. He says, great choice interview. Uncle Guy has done amazing work in our community his whole life. Kyle, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for tuning in. I know obviously y'all are practically family, and by the way, I look forward to lunch tomorrow, man. I haven't seen you in a while. That's my State Farm agent, Kyle Johnson, does a heck of a job.
His grandfather, Vernon Johnson, was my mom and dad's State Farm agent, then my agent, and then Doug Johnson became my agent. So I'm in and I assume that means Kyle's my agent too. So I think I'm on the third generation of Johnsons.
Yeah. Well, they do great work. I think back to, my parents. You remember well my parents' cabin at their farm was struck by lightning and burned. And I remember Doug, going to the scene of the embers are still burning, which you don't see out of casualty and fire agents that often. But of course, he's a dear friend too to Mom and Dad, but just a great family. And of course, Miss Judy, is the glue that holds all that together.
Absolutely.
Another great person on here, Sophie Sanders, comes on to say great interview from Reg and Sophia. So
hey, Reg.
Reggie Sanders, of course, big part of your team.
He's a wonderful employee and has been a dear friend and very good and a confidant.
Very, very talented. And so, Sophie, thank you for tuning in and sharing that. Folks, if you have a comment, a question for Clerk of Court Guy Recotta, feel free to fire away, as these other folks have. It's a real privilege to interview you, Guy. I'd like to switch gears, if you don't mind, into some of what I might call your extracurricular public service. And what I mean by that is you serve the public every day when you get up and go to work. State school, Hammond City Court, teaching school, working with speech, etc. But somehow you find an immense amount of time to serve in service organizations. I saw this firsthand through the Rotary Club. For many years, you would cross the creek and come down when you were a member of our Ponchatoula Rotary Club.
Loved it.
You now belong to another one in Hammond. But you were always the first to arrive at the Strawberry Festival, the last to leave. You would work tirelessly. And of course, I can't begin to name all the boards, but I know just off the top of my head, hospice, you chaired the North Oaks board, all these different boards, Hammond Recreation District, you name it. And please, you can list more, but let's talk about that stuff. How did you get this calling to public service and community service? Where did that come from, and how did it get started?
That came directly from my parents. Growing up in a small town and growing up in a grocery business, we had a lot of friends and family who did business with us, and we had a lot of farmers. We had many farmers back in the 50s and 60s. But my mother and my father were very giving people. My grandfather, Joe Giacone, was very giving also. He gave people the opportunity to have credit back when the credit wasn't a cool thing to have. People could.
You were taking your chances back then, and
some really did, because you had to wait literally until strawberry season sometimes.
Yeah.
And maybe you might not get it. But my parents in the 60s and 70s, my mother became very active in town because our families were always in business, and so as part of what we did is we gave back to the community that gave to us. That's how we were trained. I mean, we were raised that way. And then, to be very honest, then I was blessed to have two careers where the people that I worked for allowed me to have the opportunity, as Judge Sledge does, to have the opportunity to continue to participate in these nonprofit organizations and boards that I do. So I took it from my mom and dad and found a lot of joy doing it.
Well, let me ask you about the hospice, because the Richard Murphy Hospice Organization is one that, as I understand it, or my recollections from being a little kid, you and a number of your close friends basically founded and built up from the ground up. And off air, we were chatting about, things you and my mom did together. And that's how that was my window into it, mom being on the board with you. But tell me about how the hospice came to be and what your role was in creating it.
Sure.
Helping it grow.
I came along. Richard Murphy got ill with cancer. And
can I stop one moment? Let's for folks that don't know Richard Murphy and Paul Murphy and Jack Mill, can we just tell, who was Richard Murphy for the newer arriving folks that may not remember him?
He was a restaurateur, young man. He was a carpenter of sorts. I think he was much more of a carpenter. And he and his brother came to Hammond, and they bought what I'm used to know as the Wilson home, which is where Jocknell is now and has been forever. And they were going to turn it into a restaurant. Richard got sick with cancer, and so I didn't know him that well. I knew all the people that were helping him, and he wanted, his friends worked with him to help him have hospice care at his home. There was no hospice program prior to Richard Murphy in our community. It wasn't there. So his allowing his family and friends to help him die at home was the impetus that gave this group the idea we need to start this and we need to name it after him. Once that was done, I joined in that group to help, and we decided we needed to raise money for hospice care to make sure people, whether they could afford it or not afford it, could be allowed to have hospice care in their homes. And that's all it was in the beginning. And we tried. We did some strange things.
And you built it up into that. Now the gala is the event of the year for our whole community. How'd that happen?
I'm going to tell you how we first raised money before we went to gala.
Mm-hmm.
We had a garage sale here in Ponchatoula at Jackie Parr Chambers' house,
right
on the square. Okay,
right.
We made $1,200. That was a big success. And then Miss Shirley Wells, she was on the first board of the hot.
Oh man, my hero, Miss Shirley was the best.
I love that lady. She was amazing. She did a red beans and rice dinner out at their place. We probably raised $700. So it was this beginning. It was that beginning that gave the board. They said we're going to have to do a little bit better than this. We got to kick it up a notch. And so
you've come a long way from red beans and rice and $700.
So we decided as a board, there were 12, I think there were 12 of us on the board at that time, maybe 11. And we needed to find a way to raise more money. And in those days, our friend Mary Tatum Zadaran was in town, and she was a mover and shaker, and she was very involved.
What a fun lady, man. What a great person to serve on a board with, huh?
Oh my goodness. So we asked her to help us do a gala. It was her idea to bring the gala. And then Faye Schneider-Bright and Mary Zadaran and I co-chaired the first maybe 4 or 5 galas. But the main thing that we were able to do was bring the Schneider family in, as they were the most wonderful people and the most wonderful patrons, and so believed in hospice so much that they opened their home on Thomas Street for our very first gala sponsor party. And then they opened up the Murray Gardens for many years. And then after that, so I was telling you the story about getting ready for the auction, of that first auction.
Yeah.
The first gala we made, we cleared $26,000 on the sponsorships and $24,000 on the auction. And that still sounds like a good amount of money. But
yeah,
compared to the hundreds of thousands of dollars, 250, whatever we make.
Yeah, wow. But it's been a great start, when you come from $700 red bean events, that's a good strong start, proof of concept.
We turned your mama's house into a garage sale. We had all the auction items were up in Celeste and Eddie's house.
I love it.
I remember we were going around. They were pricing stuff, because I don't remember. They had little dots, and they were putting price on stuff.
Mom's a big color code person. I bet she had a dot color code system.
Celeste will have to tell you what she want, but your house is turned upside down, and it was the auction. It was turned into the auction holding spot.
That's great. Well, let me tell you how it comes full circle in my family. I owe a lot to the the hospice gala, in that it was my second date with my wife was, I think, the Casino Royale gala. But I literally asked her on the second date before we went on the first. It was like first date's like dinner on a Friday night. And it's like, oh, wait, gala's on Saturday. But anyway, I'm very grateful to the organization for providing me with an opportunity to get her dressed up and make magic happen. Speaking of beautiful love stories, let me bring up one that I know is dear to your heart. I have your daughter-in-law, Nicole, on here, Guy Recotta, and she says Dad has been a huge influence on her serving in our community. She hopes to be half the servant that you have been in the community, Guy.
Oh, that's so sweet.
You were kind of alluding to the fact earlier what a wonderful person she is and what a great couple she and Brandon make. And, she's got the healthcare background too. So she probably
does
a lot more about that kind of care than most of us. Melissa Bordelon hops on to say, thank you, Guy, for all you do. I think
Thank you.
Joe, I apologize. I think I missed Joe Thomas from way back.
Oops.
He's been waiting. So, Joe, many apologies. But Joe Thomas says you are a great man and mentor to many. He cherishes your friendship, and you are the definition of selfless service. Absolutely. And Joe, again, I'd say it takes one to know one, because that sounds like you describing yourself a lot. But of course, you're right. And then finally, Miss Jackie Thomas. Hey, Miss Jackie, love to hear from you. She says hello to you, Guy, and that you are a good man. And speaking of good man, I've got two good men popping in here. Boy, you got a flood of comments. Guy, I can't remember getting this many comments in a long time.
Well, I'm glad.
You are bringing it from a popularity perspective, man. But my good buddy, Marshall Graves. Marshall, I was talking about you on the radio today. And I know you guys are your son and his teammates will be on the radio soon, they were telling me. But my good buddy and fellow youth basketball coach, my partner in crime, says this podcast is an awesome way to learn more about the people we pass in our very own community, and good information today. So, Marshall, thank you for that encouragement. Like Guy, Marshall's been on the podcast, so check it out. The video's online. And Derek Wheat, we are kindergarten dads. My buddy, our sons are dear friends. He says, great interview. Community volunteers like Mr. Guy are what make our community so special. So, Derek, absolutely spot on. Thank you for chiming in. I love Derek Wheat. He's just a great guy and wonderful professional. If you need any surveying, he's top notch. So, Guy, I promised I'd get you out here in a decent time frame so you could get home. I want to honor that. We've talked about your career. We've talked about some, but not all of community service. Let's talk a little more about community service and other organizations, because as I mentioned, you served on the North Oaks board for 12 years. As I recall, you were chairman for multiple terms.
Yes.
I would hate to see us get out of here. I now serve on their foundation board. You were the original chairman of that board, which is separate from the actual North Oaks board. Tell us about North Oaks, your role in that, and what brought you to become a healthcare, leader too.
Well, I was asked by my parish councilman to serve, and I thought very long and hard about it. Talked to Grace about it, and tried to decide if that was something where I could bring something, if I were able to bring something to the table. And so, after a lot of conversations with a lot of people, I decided I'd love to serve. And what a prestigious, outstanding group of. It was a small group, only 5 board members at that time. And it was a great opportunity to learn. I learned so much about healthcare and the business of healthcare and the service, giving service to the customers, the people. And North Oaks, in my opinion, always did a very good job. And so I grew to become very dear friends with many of the employees. Michelle Sutton was a dear friend, Jimmy Cathy. But more importantly than just good friends, they ran a very good operation. As far as a non-healthcare professional would say, my judgment was it was a very good operation.
I'm seeing that as I get involved with the foundation board, and I see the challenges in front of them to grow the hospital, to meet our growing community in a time when, frankly, healthcare providers are harder to get than ever. We have this giant baby boomer population coming along. We need more doctors and nurses than ever. There are all these big players from all around looking to hire and poach people that we would like to see working here in our own community. And I see how hard they're working to do that, bringing in new doctors. We see the growth at the campus. I mean, you oversaw so much of that. It's big, state-of-the-art buildings came up, and high-profile, surgery, robots and whatnot came. And we're having more of that coming. There's a women's center. I'm living in North Oaks. The best 2 days of my life happened there. Well, my 2 sons were born. And they took such good care of us. Brandy had such a great experience. She agreed to be the spokesmodel of the OBGYN, and we came back later and kind of staged a fake birth with her in makeup. And they put that in the magazine or whatever. But, it takes a village of not just great professional administrators like Michelle, but folks like you are doing a community service. And as far as I'm aware, that's not a paid position. You put a lot of time in for zero compensation. I've seen my dear friend Angelique Richardson do it more recently. But it's important work, because if we don't get that right, our community's underserved. We're a very poor community. If we don't get this one community hospital to nail it, we're in trouble here.
Right. We're just blessed to have something as wonderful as North Oaks, and so such a comprehensive. It's a healthcare system, and we're just very fortunate to have. We live in Hammond, Louisiana, in Tanchville Parish, and we're just blessed to have it.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I want to ask someone like you, who has been so successful on so many different fronts. Personally, we see your son, your daughter-in-law, your family, and your kind of adopted nephews like Kyle coming on the show, who love you, and they're prospering in the community, professionally and personally. We see a track record of success that really no one can match at the court system, at the state school, and then all this other community service we're talking about. And we just see success after success. I want to get some of the secret sauce on how you get there and share with our viewers if we can. What advice would you give to a young person who comes along, like your daughter-in-law, who said she hopes to be half the community servant that you've been? What advice do you have for someone young like her, or anyone else who kind of wants to do what you've done and follow in your footsteps?
Thank you. That's a good question. Thank you. It's an opportunity for me to say this. Don't ask someone if they need help. Offer someone help. Say, I'm ready to go to work and I'm ready to do this. That's the key. People.
Great advice.
Just tell them what you're ready to do. I'm ready to do this. Don't ask if you need me, call me.
Yeah.
And of course, that along with, you have to have, I think, some passion and some love of your community, and that you have to want to share that, and you need to just find it and go out, find it, and get to work. Just jump in. Some of my best, my most fun is selling soft drinks and chili or beer or whatever we're selling.
Yeah.
Just talking to people and helping raise money for some good cause.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, you used to do it with us at Rotary. Now see at the other Rotary booth, y'all be flipping burgers,
we flip burgers, we cook chili.
Yeah, it's a great point. But I love your point, because you mentioned something, and I was guilty of this mistake as a younger man. What can I do for you is something you tell someone. Well, I've been volunteering with this cancer care ministry the last year or so. And, what we learned through the training that goes into that is that you're just adding to someone's burden when you say, what can I do for you? Because then on top of everything they have to process, now they have to think of something for you to do.
I have to think.
Just do it. I mean, when you see someone going through that, the problems they're having are pretty obvious. They need a meal cooked. They might need a gas card if they're traveling. There are things you can do. Just stop and do, as Nike commercial would say, just do it.
Just do it. Very good advice.
Patricia Vicknair says, loves the advice. Love, caring, doing. Hey, Miss Patricia, how are you? Thank you for tuning in. And James Gibbs Jr. again here says that life full of success that you're sharing here with us, Guy. Well, Guy, I can't thank you enough for the poignant advice you've just given, for the fun stories you've shared, mostly for the example you've set. You are an exemplar of community service and giving in this community. My parents have always tried to raise their 4 boys, and now there are many grandchildren, to be givers in the community. And that's just you. That's what you do without regard for what you might get in return. You just show up, you just do it, and you give. And it's just led to a beautiful life. And I thank you for letting me play a little small part in it. And I'm really grateful for your time, because you could be anywhere in the world. You've got a beautiful place with view of the beach. You could be there right now. You could be with your family, but you chose to spend this hour with us, and I'm grateful. So I thank you. And with that, I'll just say, is there anything else before we close on your mind, on your heart, anything at all that you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers?
Well, I just want to thank you, and thank you for having me. And I want to thank all my friends and my family for the opportunities that they've given me to be part of their lives. And all my love to your family.
Well, thank you. I know, as you know, my mom called in while we were prepping for this. She hasn't been commenting, but she's probably going to watch or watch later. She doesn't usually watch my broadcast live, but I know she's been eagerly anticipating your interview. We talked about it when I went by there for coffee this morning. But I sure the feelings there are mutual, and I'm so grateful to our listeners, to the many, many who commented, to the many, many that are still watching live 55 minutes into the interview. Thank you. We appreciate you every week. And we'll be back here next week. I don't know that we'll have somebody like Mr. Guy. We can't have somebody like this every week, but it's been a real treat. And if you know someone that wasn't able to watch live, these are online. They're on Facebook all the time. So, get the link, share it with them, and it'll live on for a while. So, Guy, once again, thank you. To everybody else, we'll see you next week. Y'all take care.